Well, hello, this is Adam and welcome back to Rare Classic Cars. Today, this 1969 Cadillac Eldorado. For those who have been fans of the channel for some time, I recently procured a 1967 Eldorado that's an all-black car, no vinyl roof, red leather interior, 18,000 mile car. But before I found that one, which by the way was sent to me by a YouTube viewer, so thank you, I procured this one probably about 3 or 4 years ago. And I got it out of Kentucky, and it was tucked way back in the back of a garage for many, many years. The last license plate sticker on it was from 1982. So bought it, again, out of Kentucky. It's got now about 26,000 miles on it. It had, I think when I bought it, maybe 25,000 or so. But the car was cosmetically in really nice shape. I had the paint professionally corrected. The interiors you'll see is just about perfect, including the steering wheel on these, which is really tough to get in perfect condition. But it needed quite a bit of mechanic work. As you can imagine, it was sitting for almost 40 years. And recored the radiator, redid the carburetor, gave it a full tune-up, valve cover gaskets, water pump as well. The radiator in this thing, because it hadn't run in so long, was just almost absolutely clogged, which is what happens when antifreeze just sits for that long of a period of time. But put everything back together and it runs just great, and it's been an absolute joy to drive. And the air conditioning still works. I had to have it recharged. But in any case, the 69 Eldorado is the penultimate year for this body style that ran from 67 to 70. And the car changed every single year to some degree. In 67, you don't have these cornering lights that you see in the fenders. They were, or I should say the parking lights in the fenders and turn signals, they were down in the bumper. That moved and changed in 68. This Cadillac had quite a bit of fitment problems with the plug that was at the end of the fender. Then in 69 there was the elimination of the hidden headlamp covers, in part because of what was thought to be new federal safety standards on the time that it took to open headlights, as well as, let's be honest, cost cutting. And then in 1970, the car really stays the same. Aside from externally, the rear is different. The taillights get a distinctly different appearance, but there's even more changes in that over time. You notice this car has side marker lights in the back. That came in 68. The 67s don't have those. And also the taillight design, even on the 69s, is a little bit different. The interiors are different every year as well, so there's a lot of one-year changes. This car was a pretty good seller in terms of the 67 to 70 model years. The 67 sold the least, with about 18,000-ish sold. This one sold about 23,000, 24,000. It was the second best year in sales compared to 1969. And it's a great car in a number of respects, and it's not such a great car in other respects. On the great side, what's under hood? Cadillac's 472 cubic inch engine that's premium fuel, high compression, putting out 375 gross horsepower. The next year, 1970, would be the first year of Cadillac's 500 and the only year that it was premium fuel and high compression, and it made 400 horsepower. The highest horsepower Cadillac until really the CTS-Vs and things like that started coming out in the early aughts. But that is also, I should say, a gross horsepower rating. Net horsepower ratings, which included the exhaust system, the accessories, the air cleaner, and all that stuff, didn't come in until 1972. So it's a bit overstated, but the car is still really peppy. And so those are great things. The engine, the transmission, this is a front-wheel drive car. I don't mind the front-wheel drive. It works just fine. I think on the downsides are really the rear suspension and this 3/4 length frame in the rear and single leafs on either side. It really is the letdown of this car, because as you go over impacts and bumps, you hear it in the cabin and you also feel it. This car does have a pretty stiff ride. This is not a floaty boat ride either. Much different from the Lincoln Mark III. And again, while the styling I think is a knockout from a stylistic perspective, the build quality on this just doesn't quite compare to the Mark III either, that was offered in the same year and came out in 1969. So let's take the camera off and discuss a little bit more about the great things about the car, as well as some of the niggles and quirks and strange things. All right, so let's do a walk around of the 69 Eldorado. As I mentioned, In 1969, they went to these exposed headlights as opposed to the concealed headlights that were in place in 67 and 8, in part due to cost, I think mostly due to cost. Cadillac had a general manager named Calvin Warner who came in during that time, and if you listen to the interviews with Wayne Cady, he talks about how he cost cut some different things during that period. So yes, even Cadillac was not spared from the cost cuts of this era. But turning to the side profile of this car, this is just a wonderful looking car. This car is actually finished in a color called Rampur Green, which I have never seen another car like it, but it's an especially handsome color. Now that the sun is down and it's becoming dusk, it looks like it's almost a dark gray graphite, which looks great on the car, but in the sunlight it has this beautiful greenish gold color that just pops. So this car plays tricks on you in terms of what color you think it is, and I just love it. I think it's the absolute perfect color for this car. It does have black leather interior, black vinyl roof. There you can see a little bit of the green here. And as I mentioned, in 69, they did have this side marker light that came in 68. The tail lamp design was a little bit different as well. And I do prefer these cars without the vinyl roof, but I think the car looks handsome even with this vinyl roof. I wouldn't complain about it at all. This car sold for about $6,700 new, and that was a pretty hefty base price. The DeVilles of the era had a base price of about $6,000, so this was a little over 10% premium versus the DeVilles. Obviously, it was a smaller car. In 69, they did go to this backup light and the fuel filler door. And if you watch my video on strange quirks and features, you'll hear me comment about the fuel filler door and how poorly designed it is. It really doesn't give you... First of all, it's hard to find a place to grab under here. There's not much clearance between it and the bumper. And then you pull up, and there's not much of a place to get your hand in there. And this is sharp, the backside of this, so you invariably end up scraping your hand. And of course, people have said, well, Cadillac owners back then didn't pump their own gas, and most people didn't anyway, so this was the fuel attendant's problem, which is true. But still, it sucks, and it's really hard. This is a tough spring on here. It almost wants to pinch your finger on the way out. Poor design. You can pop the trunk and fill the tank, but you shouldn't have to do that. Regardless, I love the back end of this car. This is the signature that really talks about Cadillac styling, not just of this particular time period, but also when the rebirth of this theme came out in the early 2000s with the art and science theme in the first gen CTS. It's really patterned off of this car. Very sharp creases everywhere, and GM styling VP Bill Mitchell used to say that these creases resembled the crease in a man's pants, kind of that fine crease, you know, that the was finely pressed, well taken care of. And I love this line down the middle here, kind of similar to what the 63 Stingray did, split window Corvette, but obviously the window is one piece here. Super, super handsome. Apparently, according to Wayne Cady, who was on the design team, this quarter panel was really tough to stamp. Remember, during this time period, GM had Fisher Body, who was responsible for the bodies of the vehicle, which meant everything from the cowl rearward. So Fisher Body was responsible for the rear quarter panel. Cadillac Division was responsible for all the sheet metal ahead of the windshield. And Fisher Body was always more conservative than Cadillac Division in terms of what they could stamp. Albeit they got through this and they accepted the challenge, which it was a challenge. Most of the cars of the 50s and 60s, as an example, have a stainless piece at the top of the fender peak because these are two pieces welded together. This is a single piece with, as you can see, very complex surfacing. You got to get the sheet metal to flow correctly to make all of these shapes and this crown and this inversion here. I mean, that is not easy at all to accomplish. But they did, and the result is just a striking car. You can see it also has cornering lights. Cadillac had very big cornering lights in this era. And I love the little details, like you got to put the Cadillac crest on here. You can tell it's a low mileage car because these emblems aren't really faded at all, even on the wheel covers where they typically faded. This car does have the front torsion bar suspension, rear single leaf setup, as I said. You can kind of see the single leaf spring in the wheel well there. That's it. That's it. That's all the spring there is, that one leaf right there. And it has two shocks on either side. Another unique element of the rear suspension, but kind of lets the car down as the frame terminates right about here, which is where the leaf shackle is. But God, what a gorgeous, gorgeous automobile. Let's look inside. And again, this is a 1 year only interior. Cadillac came out with these high back seats in 1969. And the car does have a flat floor because it's an Eldorado and doesn't have a drive shaft or a rear wheel drive transmission in it. You can see the 8-track tape player there too. This also was a new instrument panel in 1969, common with the DeVille series. And a not rather convincing faux wood grain. I actually like the interior in the 67 and 68 better, but this is still handsome. And getting inside, you can see the radio controls. This 1 year only steering wheel that would change as well in 1970 was different in 68. It does have the rim blow horn where you pinch the rim. This has a 4-note horn as well, the trumpet horn, so you can really make sure people get out of your way. Some people keep saying this is I did another video where I talk about how this casts light onto the speedometer here, and some people are saying, well, that's where the automatic climate control temperature sensor is, etc. This is the purpose of this. So you can see there, you can see right through it. There's the grill. It's to give some light onto the speedometer, which is weird, but truthful. Nice lights at the bottom of the doors, and lights in the rear sail panel. Not much room in the back seat. This is typical for these so-called personal luxury coupes. Another interesting feature is the rear window operation. You can watch here. So you can see it retracts in and out of the sail panel. Another interesting feature, often on these cars with higher mileage, this little red thing shows you where the key lines up is worn off. This car still has it. Let's pop the trunk. This car does have a big trunk, especially compared to the Riviera and Tornado of the era. So we've popped the trunk. Let's take a look. And I've got a car cover in here and things. You can see the original spare tire and the box with the jack. Kind of a double stripe tire. That's the rear window defogger, not defroster. And I lied. Actually, this car was last stickered in 1980, not 1982. That's the license plate that it had on it when I got it. And a pretty sweet Creedence Clearwater Revival tape. This trunk is also hard to close here. You really got to pull down on this lid. And it has this strut that gives it extra resistance so you don't slam it on the auto closing trunk mechanism here. But if this were somebody who didn't have that much strength, this trunk is pretty hard to close. I mean, you got to give it firm push now, and then you'll hear it latch and click, and then you'll hear a couple more clicks. And watch it. There you go. It sucks the trunk lid down by vacuum. These do have that wonderful GM key buzzer from the era. Gotta love it. Does have Twilight Sentinel, automatically turns the headlights on, as well as automatic headlamp dimming. Those were optional. Automatic climate control, power seats, 3-speed wiper control on the door here. Power windows, power locks. The locks, you sound like you're unlocking the cell block, as was typical of GM. The 67s definitely had vacuum door locks. The 8s might have as well. I don't quite know. I think in 69 they went to electric, which was a better system. Although the 67 and 8 vacuum system is quieter. Let's put the lights on and just walk around the car here. It's a great kind of twilight look. There's the side marker light illuminated. What a beautiful taillight. You could never do that today. Basically impaling pedestrians. But it sure looks cool. You can see the side marker light and the cornering light there too. Overall, a super cool car, and this is powered by Cadillac's 472 cubic inch engine, which came out in 1968. Later became the 500. That is one heavy hood. And this one, as I said, was stored and unused, so it's got a little bit of patina to it. That's the heater control there for the automatic climate control. Regulates the amount of coolant flow into the heater core. There's not a blend door on this car. This is the pump for the rear air suspension. I have it unhooked. It works, but the gasket around this outer lip leaks a little bit. So I just have the shock lines routed to a manual fill valve in the back, and I air it up once a year. These things drew so much vacuum. This is the port for it here that, it's really not advantageous, I find, to have them running. Great engine, as I mentioned. It was 375 horsepower, up from 340 in 1967. I will say the 429 that was in the 67s actually feels a little peppier than this at part throttle, but this one, when you stomp on it, really goes. Kind of a feature of Cadillacs. This car does have an air pump. You can see all the air pump stuff on here, and the air pump's down there, and you must operate the air pump because it's on the same belt as some other accessories. It's basically what drives the alternator. The alternator's on a separate belt, but the air pump gets driven off of the air conditioning, and the air pump also is what's powering the fan, which drives the alternator. Long story short, you really can't just disconnect it easily. And I suspect the fact that these had that air pump in 1969 in the federal cars is because they had some sort of emissions issue and they're jetted pretty lean, hence the lack of really strong part throttle tip-in. But other than that, it's an extremely smooth engine. Runs really well. Full dual exhaust all the way back to the muffler where it goes 2 into 1. So here we'll start it up. Turn the air conditioning off here. Don't need that on today. Just one exhaust, as I mentioned. It does have a resonator, one muffler, one resonator, but it's true dual exhaust all the way back to the muffler. Just a great looking car. In any case, hope you enjoyed this. Let's take it for a drive. Well, here we are in the 69 Eldorado, another beautiful fall day, right before the weather starts to turn crappy. Leaves are falling on the trees. These are great times for classic cars. Just something about having the windows up, having the heat on. The heat in these cars is so much better than the new ones. I don't know what they try to do on these new cars, just deflect and direct the heat in different places, but it never seems to just warm you like these old cars do. I'm sure this engine rejects far more heat than a new one because it's less efficient, but whatever. But here we go into some of the twisty turnies, and this Eldorado actually handles these really well for a car of this size. The Lincoln Mark III that I have, the 69 Mark III, would not be able to take these corners this fast. And it's a very quiet ride over smooth pavement like this, but once you start hitting some bumps, the rear leaf spring, the single leaf setup on either side just lets this car down, to be honest, and is the Achilles heel. People complained about the ride in this car even when they were new, and for a luxury car of the era, even for a non-luxury car, the ride is very stiff and really not that great. It's kind of disappointing, especially in light of the fact that the powertrain is wonderful. The 472 in this is extremely smooth, like all the GM big blocks of the era. Transmission, the turbodynamic 425, shifts perfectly. Much smoother than the Ford C6. Oh, there's a old Mercury that just turned there. Didn't quite catch it. Have to go back on video and take a look at it. Looks like a early mid-60s-ish Mercury. But that's really the Achilles heel in these cars. Otherwise, the rest of it is great. The steering feels really nice. The brakes feel good. The 472 actually feels a little less peppy than the 429. And they all feel that way. These Cadillac V8s don't quite have the part throttle oomph, if you will, that the other GM divisions did. I think they are just jetted really lean. This car is a federal car in 1969 and it has an air pump, which means that it was polluting enough that it needed one. My guess is that they were jetted super lean to try to overcome that, and it doesn't allow you to have the good part throttle response. It's easily changed. You just change the metering rods or the jets and the quadrajet carburetor, but it doesn't bother me enough. I mean, this car is plenty peppy as is to do anything about it. Seats in this car are kind of flat bottom. This car only has 22,000 miles, but pretty hard seat for the era. Very European. And again, the cornering is good over flat surfaces, not bumpy roads. So if you get one of these, don't expect the Ford mushy, gushy ride. Expect something firm with some noise intrusion in the cabin. Otherwise, the road noise and the wind noise in this car is low. It's really just that rear suspension. And the interior materials by this day weren't that great. You kind of got the stick-on wood grain, which a lot of other companies used in other GM divisions, but it just doesn't look quite as convincing in the Cadillac. Ford did really good faux wood grain somehow. In any case, thanks for watching and coming along for the ride.